This was my bumper sticker long after I lost the ability to walk. I told myself and anyone who would listen that I was a runner and that I would not let this disease define me. You see, for nearly 4 decades, I ran almost every day. I kept meticulous running logs to record each run. I logged the weather, any aches and pains, but mostly how much mileage I put on my running shoes. I am notoriously frugal, but I knew that running on worn and broken down footwear leads to injuries. Those running logs, year after year, added up to over 75,000 miles, and I was able to stay consistent all those years by staying relatively injury-free. My biggest fear was, heaven forbid, my knees might go bad. Let me rewind to the beginning. I was the youngest kid in my family. My sister was smarter, and my brother was bigger and stronger, so I always felt I needed to prove myself. Before I thought of myself as a runner, I tried the usual sports. I played Little League baseball in grade school, but I was that kid in the outfield whose baseball glove just dropped that fly ball. At bat, the most likely way for me to get on base was to get hit by the pitch. Not long after I moved on from baseball, we discovered that I needed glasses. To this day, I still use that as my excuse for not being an all-star. Next, I tried basketball. Due to a late growth spurt, I was the shortest kid on my 7th grade team, but I discovered I was quick, and that led to me leading my team and stealing the ball from the other team. Unfortunately, I also led the team in missed uncontested layups. I usually got my own rebound, only to miss again. So apparently basketball wasn't my calling either. In 9th grade, we moved to Texas, and I decided to try football. I didn't appreciate that in Texas, football isn't a sport, it's a religion. I was the smallest and skinniest kid on my 9th grade team. The only thing I had going for me was my speed. But when a 95-pound wide receiver catches a pass in front of a 200-pound 9th grade Texas-sized linebacker, well, that's a good physics lesson. I learned a lot about motion, energy, and opposing forces. So baseball wasn't my thing. Basketball wasn't it either. I didn't have the body type for football, especially in Texas. So what was left? I love to run. It took no real eye to hand coordination. With running, the likelihood of being hit by someone much bigger than me was gone. It didn't require expensive equipment. I could practice whenever I wanted. I wasn't confined to the availability of a football field, a basketball court, or a baseball diamond. I could simply lace up my shoes and take off. I didn't start off running competitively. I simply ran because I enjoyed running. And the more I ran, the easier it got. And the easier it got, the more I enjoyed it. After college, I moved back to Texas. Not because I missed it, but because my dad died and my mom was there alone. From May to September, the Texas heat was brutal, but running was already a big part of my life, so my routine became a nightly run after the sun went down. Then a cool shower, then an uninspired dinner. I wasn't a creative cook. Then finally to bed. I started running a few races back then and soon ran my first marathon. That was a painful lesson on how not to train. I think that marathon distance was a good 11 or 12 miles further than my longest training run. I just saw so many people doing it, so I thought, how hard can it be? I laughed when I saw a guy dressed as Santa Claus at the starting line. I didn't think it was quite so funny when I saw Santa pass me at mile 25. During those 5 post-college years of living in the Dallas heat, I had met and married a girl from here on the seacoast. We met while skiing in Austria, but that's a subject for another talk. Anyway, I had a chance to visit Portsmouth. For a guy who had only lived in the center of the country, far from the oceans or any mountains, Portsmouth seemed magical. I'm an architect and a history buff. I found Portsmouth fascinating. The draw to live here was strong. I had bought a house in Dallas that was roughly 6 miles from my downtown office, as the crow flies. But in that traffic, it was nearly a 45-minute commute. If it wasn't so miserably hot, I could have run there faster when I explored the idea of moving up here. I thought I'd have another long daily commute into Boston for work, but my final interview was right here in Portsmouth. I liked the firm and the owners who had interviewed me. But before I left, I used their restroom. There, I not only found a shower, but also a gym bag and a pair of running shoes. So yeah, that sealed the deal in my mind. On the first day at my new job in Portsmouth, I ventured out for a run at lunchtime. I thought it was incredibly cool that I could cross a bridge and be in a different state within a few minutes. On my way back, I discovered that bridge was a drawbridge. And of course, just as I approached, a siren sounded, lights flashed, and the crossing gate came down. In the distance, I could see an enormous ship surrounded by tugboats very slowly inching nearer. To make matters worse, it began to rain. It was nearly 3/4 of an hour before the bridge's gate went up, and I made it back to the office very late and soaking wet. Not exactly the impression I wanted to make on my first day. So, once I settled into my new life, now I'm in Portsmouth, I discovered it's an incredible place to be a runner. Instead of running on the concrete sidewalks alongside of the Dallas traffic, I was now crossing bridges onto a beautiful island. I was running along a river, crossing beaches with ocean views. I ran through forests on quiet dirt paths. I cut through historic cemeteries that forced me to stop occasionally to read about the people who had lived here centuries before I did. I also discovered a wealth of local races to test out. Back then, the Market Square Day 10K was impressively large, with impressively fast, talented runners towing the starting line. The more I ran, both in simple training runs and in local races, I began to recognize the reoccurring faces of my competition. These were the people that ended up near me at the finish lines or who always beat me. Soon, I started putting names to the faces. Oh, I had discovered that this area has a robust and talented running community. Community is the perfect word for what I found, a group of similarly dedicated people who share my passion for doing what I loved and shared my identity as a runner. I found a number of individuals who were driven to train hard, press themselves to get better. That's something that didn't exist back in Dallas. Back there, the other runners were strangers and I trained alone. But here, these runners became friends. But since I have a competitive nature, they also became my rivals. One person I frequently noticed running the opposite direction during my typical lunch run around Newcastle. Being true to my Minnesota and Midwestern roots, I could never pass another runner without a wave and a hello. Well, that spring I was running my very first Boston Marathon. It was something I had dreamed of doing, even before I thought of myself as a runner. Anyway, I'm settling into my pace, establishing my rhythm when I feel a tap on my shoulders. It's that guy I kept seeing on my lunch runs. We introduce ourselves and say little else. Surprisingly, we are running the same pace, and we pace each other all the way to the finish line. I think I remember trying to lose him as we kicked down Boylston Street. I'm sure he was doing the same. And that was Jim Marchese, who grew up in Portsmouth. He became my daily training partner. We often ran together 7 days a week. We went on to run 3 more Boston marathons together, side by side, pushing each other all the way to the finish line. Ahead of our 4th Boston Marathon, we trained pretty hard straight through the winter. Neither one of us were willing to show weakness by sitting out a storm. We had a couple horrendous 3-hour runs during the heart of epic nor'easters. Neither of us were particularly fast marathoners, but we set a goal of 2 hours and 45 minutes, respectable, but far from elite. We were right on target at mile 21 when suddenly my quads cramped and totally locked up. I told Jim to keep running and break our goal, but frustratingly, he refused and said, "We crossed the finish line together." I can't say I would have done the same, but he waited while I tried to stretch out the cramps. Then we shuffled the final 5 miles together. 5 minutes slower than our goal, but he taught me something much more important than that arbitrary 2 hour and 45-minute goal we had set for ourselves. The more I ran in the Seacoast, the more like-minded, talented runners I met. And the more of these runners I met, the more training partners I had. The more training partners I had, the more I was pushed. And the more I was pushed, the faster I became. And the faster I became, the more I enjoyed running, especially with these people. I managed to win a few races now and then, mostly when my faster friends like Guy Stearns or Mike O'Brien didn't show up. But ultimately, I was racing against the seconds ticking by on my watch. For example, I felt stuck in a rut with my times for a 5-kilometer race. That's 3.1 miles for the non-runners out there. One year, I ran 10 races in a row under 16:10, but couldn't quite get under the elusive 16-minute mark. But I eventually hung on to a couple faster guys, dug deeper than I thought I could, and finally broke that barrier with 11 seconds to spare. Now that I had these running buddies, we formed teams occasionally to run in relay competitions. Of course, all of these guys are extremely competitive, so there was no running just to compete. The goal was always to win. It was fun to be on a team finally, but I always felt more pressure not to be a weak link. I traveled frequently for work, and even when I was on the road, I felt pressure to train. I always knew that my competition wasn't taking a day off. So even when I had a late night flight, I was up before sunrise the next morning. That's the great thing about running compared to other sports. I just packed a pair of running shoes, some shorts, and a t-shirt, and I was good to go. I ran everywhere I went, from Florida to California, down dark logging roads in northern Maine, looping Stanley Park in Vancouver, urban runs in Chicago, Washington, New Orleans, Kansas City, San Francisco, Los Angeles, and so on. Work even took me overseas. I was running past the Grand Mosque in Abu Dhabi when I heard the haunting call to prayer. Not knowing the proper etiquette, I froze until I saw traffic still flowing by. One of the reasons that I was in many of those cities was that I was driven to attend educational conferences for my design specialty. You see, I was competitive as an architect as well. I refused to have my competition better informed than I was. I imagined that I was even competitive back in my office. When I was given my first assignment in my second week, I was here. I quietly pulled an all-nighter to impress my bosses and show what I was capable of. But by the time of that business trip to Abu Dhabi, things were drastically changing for me. I had noticed that I couldn't grip things with my left hand, and I tripped and fell a few times. The neurologist at Mass General had diagnosed me with a very rare degenerative neuromuscular disease, primary lateral sclerosis. Speech was becoming slurred, and I could tell my legs were struggling to receive what my brain was telling them to do. I'll be completely honest with you. I was scared. Not about what that meant to me as a runner, but me as a provider for my family. I was able to keep running for a while. I even joined some of my training partners to run one final marathon in Philadelphia. I roughly knew what lay ahead for me, so that race was incredibly emotional for me. I don't know if I had shared my diagnosis with my friends. I hid it as long as I could. Even though I was already in my 50s and my left leg was dragging a bit, I thought I could still run under 3 hours. I dug deep and teared up as I crossed the finish line. I made it under 3 hours with 27 seconds to spare. But I couldn't have accomplished it without my friends pacing, pushing, and encouraging me over those miles. A short time later, my legs just weren't getting the signals from my brain. And I ran alone for a few weeks, mainly because I was embarrassed and I didn't want to slow my friends down. I realized then that it was ego that drove me. And ego is a hard thing to shed. I'd been accused of always being a half a step ahead on our group training runs, and I subconsciously sped up whenever I was inside of another runner. Both were simply examples of my fragile ego. I was trying to overcome my self-image as that kid that dropped the pop fly or missed that easy layup. But Proverbs says pride comes before a fall. I guess I've learned that lesson very well, both figuratively and literally. As I'm sure you've noticed, but at the same time I lost the ability to walk I gradually lost the ability to form words. It's incredibly difficult to maintain your self-esteem and your ego when you need a walker to stand upright and can't be understood. I dreaded running into acquaintances in public who might be unaware of the changes I was going through. Not being able to say a simple hello or explain myself is excruciating. But as my abilities and my ego were suffering, my training partners rallied around me. First, they organized funds to purchase a recumbent three-wheeler to keep me on the road. There was enough money left over to build a ramp, and they even gave up a few weekends to build it for me. These guys who I had initially seen as my competition and my rivals weren't leaving me behind. I discovered Portsmouth almost 40 years ago, but I didn't just find a place. I found a community of incredible support and friendships built over several decades. Once my abilities faded and my words became slurred, my battle stopped being against other runners or the seconds ticking by on my watch. My nemesis was now simply my ego. When I used a walker initially, I would pull up at work and wait until no one else was in the parking lot. I hated being seen, struggling to stumble towards the entrance. Everyday things like pulling open a door were an embarrassing challenge. The thought of being pitied was horrifying to my previously athletic identity. I wanted to still be seen as the statement on my bumper sticker. I am a runner, damn it. A lot of time has passed since I finally began to accept that we don't get to choose what defines us. I was a runner, but that's not who I am today. I'm the person you see sitting in this wheelchair. I'm the person who's having this story shared using a voice that isn't mine. But you know what? I'm okay with that. When my transformation began, I was incredibly self-conscious. I didn't want to be seen as, well, what I now am. But it took a while, but I think I finally defeated my ego. That was much harder to accomplish than winning any of those races. Today, I don't mind being seen. I honestly appreciate simple acts of kindness. Holding a door for me, or even receiving a smile, it warms my heart. And those other runners, the ones who I trained with over countless miles, the ones who bought me that adaptive three-wheeler, the ones who built my ramps, they now gather at my house every month to play nickel and dime poker, share craft beers, but mostly to make fun of each other and laugh. The one thing that hasn't changed is that we're still competitive. So they're still my rivals. I ask myself a question. If I had a crystal ball 20 or 30 years ago and saw what laid ahead in my future, would I have done things differently? Would I have been more fiercely competitive? Would I have tried harder, or would I have pushed myself in other directions? I don't have an answer to those questions, except I think I would hold open doors and offer smiles more often. That friend that I met during my first Boston Marathon, who I trained with daily for next several decades, we laughed about considering ourselves as, well, immortal, but neither of us were. I'm still fighting my battle, but sadly, cancer won his. Back to the topic, competitiveness is what drove me to succeed in running, obviously, but also in my career and in life, I imagine. Being driven to be better tomorrow than you are today. And anything you care about tells us you're competitive, even if it means your competition is your current self. In running, I wasn't competing against the other runners. I was racing against myself, measured by the seconds ticking by on my wristwatch. Maybe I was racing against my ego. But to achieve my success, I needed others to help, encourage, and push me. Thanks for indulging me by listening to my running stories. Looking around this room, I can only imagine how many unique and individual passions each of you represents. So, if you have a magical crystal ball and can look into your future, would it change what you're doing presently? Since you're attending a creative morning session, it tells me that you're curious, intelligent, and probably empathetic. All are amazing qualities. It also tells me that you have a community of like-minded, passionate people sitting around you today. Like that guy who tapped me on the shoulder during that long ago Boston Marathon. Reach out to someone you might not know and introduce yourself. You never know who might share a similar passion or open your eyes to a new one. I guess my closing thought regarding this topic of competition would be to push yourself beyond your comfort zone. But don't let self-consciousness or contentiousness or your ego get in the way. Most importantly, don't take your tomorrow for granted. Tomorrow might not be what you expected it to be. My only advice is to not make excuses or put things off. Surround yourself with supporters, be driven, stay competitive, even if it's with yourself. Now, when I see someone out for a jog or simply walking their dog, I'm in awe of that gift, and I pray that they truly appreciate it. Thank you for listening. And don't forget to show small acts of kindness, even if it's just a simple smile.